If you've survived narcissistic abuse, what is the worst advice that you've had? Leave a comment because I'd love to hear it and maybe we can compare notes. One of the worst pieces of advice that I've heard given to survivors of narcissistic abuse is that you need to forgive and forget. You need to move on. You need to not blame everything on the other person and take responsibility for your part in this relationship. Comments like that sound minimizing. They sound like they're denying your experience and the suffering and the loss that you have been through. And they sound that way because they are that way. Now, it may not be the other person's intention to do that. They really may not appreciate the extent to what you've been through, but nonetheless, those kind of comments are a denial of your experiences, a denial of your reality, and a way of minimizing what you've been through. How do you begin to move on? My name's Ruth Ann. I'm a clinical psychologist. I'm an expert in relationships and issues of narcissism. And in this video, I'm going to tackle the thorny subject of forgiveness, whether it's even possible, and more importantly, how you can start to move on and build a life where there is joy and peace after narcissistic abuse. Let's talk about forgiveness. So the first thing to say about forgiveness is there has to be something to forgive. There has to be acknowledgement of the hurt, of the pain, of the loss, of the abuse that has happened. Because without fully acknowledging what has happened and what you've been through, there is nothing to forgive. You cannot forgive it if you don't acknowledge it. Now, one of the most painful aspects of narcissistic abuse is that the chances of the person who abused you ever acknowledging what they've done and the way that they treated you are slim to none. And that is one of the most painful things to go through. And if you've been through narcissistic abuse, the one thing you might really, really want would be for the person who has hurt you, who has abused you, who has lied to you, who has betrayed you, who has gaslit you, who has minimized your experience, to acknowledge what's happened to you. It is not going to happen, or it's very, very unlikely. And so you can really end up stuck wanting acknowledgement, wanting that validation, and it not coming. Now, it is not possible to forgive without that acknowledgement. You're not going to get it from the perpetrator. But what you can do is start with yourself. You need to know for yourself what happened. You need to really understand your experience and not run away from the extent of it. You need to know that you never exaggerated anything, that you have never made a mountain out of a molehill, and that you are not someone who is making a big fuss out of nothing. The abuse that you experienced was never your fault, and that you should not be blamed for what happened to you. Relationships are not 50-50. Partners are not always equally culpable for the problems in the relationship and what they have been through. The first thing to do is to really understand the extent of what you've been through, to see your suffering and see your pain, to hold it with an attitude of compassion. So compassion means with suffering. It means to be present, to see and acknowledge the pain, the suffering, the loss, the abuse, and everything that you've been through, with an attitude of wishing that you were well, with really being able to say to yourself how sorry you are for what you've been through, that you didn't deserve it, and that you wish that your suffering and your pain could be alleviated. That is really where it starts. And it can be very, very helpful to have other people around you to witness that, to see what you've been through. If you've been through narcissistic abuse, you probably have a ton of shame. It's really common for people to blame themselves and to think that they had something to do with it. And of course, that makes comments like you need to forgive and look at your role in this all the more painful because it can feel so shaming. So if you are able to find people, whether that's a therapist who's experienced in working with survivors of narcissistic abuse, or very good friends or family members, and you can share what you've been through with them and have them see, have them acknowledge, have them really witness for you what you've been through, That is so healing because it brings it into the light. And shame thrives in darkness. It thrives in secrecy. It thrives on telling you that you can't possibly share this with other people, that they would judge you harshly. And the experience of being seen and heard and fully understood is so tremendously healing. And it can often be the first step out of the anger and the resentment that you very rightfully feel towards the person who hurt you. There are all kinds of social, cultural, spiritual, and religious ideas about forgiveness. And as a clinical psychologist, I don't want to venture too far into that territory. But if forgiveness means restoring trust, restoring respect, restoring commitment to a relationship, I don't think that's possible in the absence of acknowledgement of the hurt and the harm that's been done. And it's very unlikely that a narcissistic person is going to do that. Now, they may say, well, I'm sorry I hurt you. I mean, let's just move on. That's not seeing. That's not acknowledging what you have been through. It's not really giving you empathy and making space so you can feel seen and heard and understood. And if that is not happening in your relationship, how is forgiveness possible? Because what are you forgiving? But maybe forgiveness is possible for you. Not for the person who abused you, but for yourself. If you can acknowledge the hurt, the pain, the suffering, if you can really see yourself, and if you can take an attitude of genuine compassion and commitment to your own well-being, to respecting yourself, to loving yourself and nourishing yourself, then you may be able to find it within you to forgive yourself for ending up in this relationship, to forgive yourself for staying in it, to forgive yourself for the times that you minimized what you went through, to forgive yourself for the times that you've beaten yourself up and been self-critical. Because if anyone deserves that kind of forgiveness, it's you. And the path to moving on from narcissistic abuse has to start by really acknowledging what you've been through, acknowledging the hurt and all of the loss. Because when you can start to do that, and you can start to feel soft, tender, forgiving, and kind towards yourself, because then you don't want for yourself to be sitting in fantasies of revenge and anger, as understandable as they may be. But you may want to leave that prison and start to move on, to live peacefully, to build new relationships, including your relationship with yourself, to build relationships where you're treated with respect, to pursue the things in your life that are important to you, whether that's your career, your family, your friends, your relationships, or just other things that matter to you. When you can really begin to invest in yourself, to invest in your own growth, that's when you can move on from narcissistic abuse. And that's when you can forgive the only person who deserves your forgiveness. And that's you. I'd love to hear what you think of this video, so leave a comment. And if you liked it, please do consider subscribing. I look forward to seeing you next time. In the meantime, take good care.